So the first step is going to be downloading the installer with the pastebin command, or the wget command that's on the GitHub README. And there you can then check to see what all the versions are. You'll get a warning if you haven't already downloaded anything that there's no local installation manifest, and that's just fine. If you have downloaded something and you're getting that warning, you're going to have problems updating. So for example, we'll install the RTU here. And it'll go through the installation process, downloading all the files. The newer version in the next release is going to have a versioned graphics as well. From here, you would first be editing your config file. In this case, the RTU config is under RTU/config. It's going to be the same as the installation name for all the different things. So as an example here, it starts with a boiler and a turbine, and then a bunch of commented out Redstone configurations. If you're on a single player world, you're going to be fine keeping all the channels constant, but if you're on a multiplayer world, you're either going to want to, you're just going to want to use your own channels. There'll be 5 total channels, and anywhere in a config file where you see the same name, it'll have to be the same channel for everything to work right. So we're going to go to some RTUs I already have set up because they get pretty complicated pretty fast. So we'll look at this setup here, which first we'll see there's a wireless modem on top, a wired modem connected to the computer, which does not have to be with red border connected to the network, but all the other devices do need to be. So see here, it's red. If I break it, and then put it back, it's black. So when you right click it, you'll see peripheral turbine valve 0 connected to the network. And then down here in the config, if we go down, you'll see turbine valve 0 index 1, because this is our number 1 turbine for reactor unit number 1. So for reactor is 1. And then for our number 1 turbine for the second reactor, which is connected over there, we have for reactor set to 2. And then up on the ceiling, I have an induction matrix, and that is connected with this name. For induction matrices currently, you can only have 1, so index should always be 1. And then for reactor is set to 0 for devices that belong to the facility. So induction matrices are always going to have an ID of 0. And here I have 2 environment detectors for radiation, and those are each assigned to one of the reactors. The facility also supports having an environment detector for like just facility-wide radiation, which you could put in the control room or anywhere else you want. And down here, I still don't have any redstone on this one, so we can exit out of here. Once you're happy with the config, you should be able to start it up. And if there's any errors, it'll tell you, any typos and such. And you'll want to see that the heartbeat will blink periodically, and the modem, it won't boot without a wireless modem, which is the main thing that's used between connecting all these devices. The computer IDs in parentheses, which will help when you're looking at the supervisor to see what's connected. And then the network light should be green. If it's off, you should check your channels or trusted range if you're using that feature, which prevents accepting connections outside of a certain distance between computers. By default, it's off. But you'll get green when it's happy. And there's a couple other colors that you can look at the wiki. Same for all of these other lights. And RT here is just routine, in this case the coroutine, telling you if it's running. It'll turn off if it's not. So when you shut it down, you see a couple go off quickly as it exits. Down here we have a invisible wandering trader at the moment, but the RTU gateway down here has a bunch of redstone configurations. And those always will have no light because those don't need a routine because they're just directly accessed. So here I have a very dense setup here using colored redstones. Right now SPSs and solar neutron activators are not supported on the current release. Those are for my testing. So here is where it gets a little more complicated. So make sure you keep track of all of the brackets. I want to make sure of that. This is basic just Lua table, but since it's so large, might lose track of it. But you'll get just weird little warnings if it's wrong. So for Reactor 1, I have these I/O definitions. So I have, also all of these are listed on the wiki, but I have the polonium output, the plutonium output, polonium pellets, and antimatter, all going to the top with different bundled colors. Now, if you don't have a mod that supports that, like in this case I'm using Immersive Engineering, you can instead just set different sides, and you'll probably need a couple more devices to do this. So in this case I have red, orange, yellow, and lime, which are going over here. So up here is from the reactor, and then this red, make sure you have redstone sensitivity. Did not mean to do that, but redstone sensitivity, just basic right click with the configurator. So you want that on. In this case, I'm closing off this valve because I have it set to, I think, plutonium production right now. So in this case, it's closing this valve that goes to the solar neutron activators and opening the one going to the centrifuge to make plutonium. So if I change the mode, it would instead go like down this route, through there, and then come up here, and this valve, sends it to the SPS. So that's the just antimatter setting. This one would be the polonium pellets, since the alternative to antimatter then goes down to make the polonium pellets here. And then this one right there is the plutonium, which cuts off like that. So additionally, if you are not using bundled redstone, you're going to want to either just delete the bundled color line, or just set it to nil. So you do either like that, or just delete the line. I do not want to save that, so I'll start that back up. See it connect to the network, all set. So Supervisor config. Here, this one has all of your channels, so this can be your source of truth. If you change any channels, make sure these numbers match any of the devices. So down here, I have 2 reactors, and they are not cooled by sodium, or just water. So the boilers is set to 0, and turbines is set to 1. So num reactors equals 2, and then the reactor cooling config needs to look like this for this 1 reactor, 1 turbine setup. So with that, let's start it up. So these are all the reactor PLCs. Link will be either on or off. That's the computer ID, the firmware version, and the round trip time. So how long it takes a packet to get between the 2 devices. Nominally, this should be about 150 milliseconds to 300 milliseconds, depending on how fast the server is running. 150 milliseconds is the loop time of the supervisor. So sometimes it'll be faster depending on when it arrives, but usually it'll be around there. So see, here's the 150s that we want to see. And this is where your coordinator connection will be. This is for pocket computers, which are still in alpha, so not really much you can do with those. So down here I have my coordinator. So there's a coordinator settings file that is not meant to be user edited, but if you want to, like if you have a monitor issue, you can manually edit the monitor definitions in here. So your primary display is your very large monitor there, and unit displays is going to be your reactor 1, reactor 2, etc. So in here, same thing with ports. Your timeouts, generally you're going to want to leave it 5 if your server is really slow and you keep having like disconnections and reconnections, which with the coordinator will be the screens turning off and back on. You can increase these timeouts. Now, number of units here needs to match supervisor's number of units. It's used to verify on startup the amount of monitors you have, so make sure that matches. You'll get this primary display is not connected. I'll do, you don't have to necessarily capitalize it because that's the default. So it'll list your available monitors. It's not going to autofill like the specific size or anything, it's just going to do the first one. So in this case, I know when I hooked it up, which is going to be very hard to access at the moment because I've buried everything, but it says monitor 0, so we're going to go there, monitor 0, and now unit 1 I had as monitor 1, and unit 2 I had as monitor 2. And then after that, it'll start up the whole program, and it'll see this if everything's currently connected. The computers themselves don't need to have the little modem read, as I said before, but down here I just have a network modem connecting Down there is the speaker that you need to have connected, so make sure that's hooked up. And I have just a wireless modem. And then over here, I have it connected with monitor 0 when I right-clicked it. And over here is monitor 1, and over here is monitor 2. And now most importantly is the actual reactor controllers. Now these are special because they can run by themselves if you set network to false in the config, in which case it'll still do safety trips and stuff, but it won't actually need to be connected to the supervisor. And if config is set, if that's configuration is set to true, then it will need to be connected to the supervisor. So in this case, I've got reactor 2 here. We go into the config, I have reactor unit set to 2, network set to true. And now here's the emergency coolant, which is optional. It's the same thing as the Redstone configurations, where you set a side and a color for the bundled, or a color nil if you don't have a color. And in this case, I don't have it set up right now, but what you would do is you'd put it next to a pipe that you enabled redstone sensitivity on, and you could open coolant flow in case of, let me get to this screen, in case of low coolant, and then it'll open up that coolant. So that'll happen with or without networked mode, just as a safety feature. However, not in networked mode, the turbine won't automatically be set to dump excess. So if you just have a basic setup with just a reactor, you probably want to set this to dumping excess if you have emergency coolant set up. I'll just show behind here, I have a reactor logic adapter. So put the computer there, the modem on whatever side you want, and then I have it as startup already. It's already installed, so there you go. Brings the app up. You can manually scram the reactor from here as a safety feature. This is the only front panel that can actually do something at the moment, has actual interaction, and then you can reset it here. So now that you've completed all the setup, we can look over here and figure out how to use this thing. So I'm not going to cover every feature right now or what everything here means, but the main things you need to know is over here is all of these trips. These are all the warnings about coolant issues. And then this is some main status information. This is the burn rate that you're telling it to do. This is the actual one, it's heating rate, all that stuff. Radiation will be 0 if you don't have an environment detector connected, but if you have an environment detector connected, you'll get a green light on radiation monitor. And see here for the facility, I don't have one, so it's off, which does not indicate anything about radiation, just that it's online. And if there is a radiation problem, you'll get, over here, you'll get an alarm for the radiation. And for the facility, if it's running, it'll have a facility ration high alarm. And those will cause the reactor to scram if it has not from other causes. Over here, if you just saw that I pressed this little R button, that resets the alarm. So this was green, which means the alarm happened but is all good now and no longer true. So that was reactor lost. So if I go down here, stop the reactor, go up here, you'll hear a little alarm going off, and reactor lost. So you can acknowledge that with either this button to acknowledge just that alarm, this button to acknowledge all the alarms on this, or this acknowledge for every unit, including the facilities alarms. So in this case, it's alarms off, but it's still blinking. So to resolve that, we're going to go in here and start the reactor controller back up. Now you see it's green again, which is the ring back state. Clear that, you're all good. And that'll let you know if something happened while you weren't watching. So these reactors right now are set in automatic control mode, so you can't actually start or reset because it's not scrammed, but you can only scram or acknowledge and then reset if it's scrammed. You can't actually start or change the burn rate. So if you want to do it manually, you'd set that. See the same manual? This manual there. Re-enabled. You can set whatever burn rate you want. Like that. If you click like maximum, it'll do the minimum. If you go that, it'll do the minimum. So, etc. Do like that. Set that. Start the reactor up. You'll see everything get up. For water ones, you'll usually get a flow low warning as the water kind of drains out into the turbine a bit. And these won't actually trip any safeties because it's waiting for flow stability, which is a 15 or so second window. So here you'll see the current coolant level, the fuel level, heated coolant, waste, and the turbine steam level and energy level. The energy level starts going up, you'll get a generator trip, which means in this case, it means that you are no longer like have anywhere to put your energy. In real world, the definition's a little different, but that's the closest you can get. And the turbine trip is if the turbine is completely stalled, and that is the famous way to blow up these reactors, which usually results from your induction matrix getting full. And now you can avoid that by running it in auto mode. So in this case, let's get this one set to the primary group. This one's already set to the primary group. In this case, I want to have about, it's a giga FE, it's a tera FE. Say we want 2 tera FE stored in this 3.2 tera FE capacity. So I already have that, so in this case you'll see it. Just go charge level, since that's this, and you'll start that. You'll see the reactors probably be idling until we get below 2 tera FE to a significant amount. You'll see min-max burn rate light up if it's outputting the minimum, which is 0, or the maximum. In this case, our unit limits are 0.1, so we're stuck at a maximum. So let's raise the limits. Let's just do the maximum since I've tested that. It doesn't explode. Stop, or already stopped, so no, I need to clear these. So it won't be ready after you scram it, so you need to go reset the reactors. And at that point, you can hit start, and it'll run the control loop for this. You'll see the reactors start up, they'll ramp up a little bit, see their actual rates there or on the screens. So it's going to try to get to the 2 tera FE target. It'll cut out a little bit around there because what happens is the turbines keep going after the reactor stops, so it'll do its best, but doesn't necessarily land there perfectly. What it is much better at is the generation target, since that's just a consistent rate of generation. And that you can also set, and then you would do generation rate. You can't edit any of this when it's running. Monitored max burn will just run the reactors at these 2 limits. Combined burn rate will let you run it at whatever total burn rate you want, and it won't exceed the limits. These limits will always prevent you from going above any rate when you're doing automatic control. The ready light here just means the reactor is online, all the devices for it are online, and it's not scrammed. And degraded will occur if it loses the reactor, or if it loses the turbine, or any of the other unit-specific devices that it needs. Say we do generation rate here. I'm going to generate mega FE per tick. Actually, let's do a bit more than that. Do 6. Start that up. See ramping light starts flashing as it tries to bring it up to that target. So with generation mode, it has to ramp up to its expected target, which tends to be very good. And then at that point, it'll engage to the control loop where it'll try to get it perfect. In this case, instead of targeting a charge, it's targeting a rate. So there's a chance that you might fill your induction matrix. But instead of doing that, once the induction matrix gets high, it's going to pause generation mode. Or if it's any of these other modes, if it gets too high, it'll pause, including monitored max burn and combined burn rate. And then it'll resume once it gets below the threshold, which is documented on the wiki. Then here, you can use this to scram the whole facility, which will stop all the reactors. Generation mode goes in idle state because the system's not ready. You can stop it if you wanted to just exit, but it's to get it happy again, you would reset these since I scrammed them. And then it's going to have to restart the generation mode. So it's going to re-ramp, and then once it gets to there, it'll wait a bit, and then it'll engage the PID controller. The important thing for generation mode is all of the turbines that are set to automatic control need to have the same number of blades, because different numbers of blades have a different efficiency percentage, which means if you put a certain amount of steam in, it'll generate a different amount of power than one with a different number of blades. So without that, you'll get a warning saying that there's a blade count mismatch, and you need to make sure all the blades is the same amount. And down in waste processing here, auto mode will be out in the next release, but polonium, plutonium, antimatter, all that, color-coded nicely, will let you change those valves if and only if you actually configure them and they're actually set up. It will not tell you if they're not set up because I don't really have a lot of space right now, but it will change those valves There'll be a new screen eventually that shows the state of all the valves, which will only actually indicate them if you have them configured. But in this case, I'm generating plutonium. So that's the overview of this. Please leave a comment on the video if you have any questions, any issues. If you encounter any bugs, create a bug report on the GitHub. You can also use GitHub to create a discussion for any questions or ideas, suggestions, all that stuff. So, enjoy.
Okay, relax. Everybody relax.
Got high water in the core and I'm gonna dump it.
There's nothing to worry about. It's just a routine turbine trip.